The harsh sun beat down on Coalridge as Eliza Morgan hurried through the streets, her shawl pulled tight to shield her face from stares and whispers. 20 years of cruel mockery had taught her to move quickly, to become invisible. At 35, she'd accepted her place, the spinster librarian with the twisted lip and scarred cheek. The townsfolk had branded her ugly, so long that even she believed it. That same afternoon, a cloud of dust announced the arrival of Nathaniel Hayes, whose empire stretched across 3 territories. Women with painted faces and perfect smiles lined up for his attention, yet his piercing blue eyes found only Eliza. But why would a man who could have anyone choose the woman everyone scorned? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Coalridge had not always been cruel to Eliza Morgan. There was a time, back when the silver mines first opened and the town was little more than tents and promise, when she had been just another child with pigtails and dreams. Her father, the town's first schoolteacher, had instilled in her a love of books that outlasted everything, including him. Eliza adjusted the worn leather strap of her satchel and kept her eyes fixed on the dusty road ahead. The morning ritual never varied, 23 steps from her small cottage to the corner, a right turn past Miller's General Store, then the gauntlet of Harker Street where the proper ladies took their morning tea on the hotel porch. "Morning, Miss Morgan," called Stanley Miller from his store entrance, the only consistent kindness in her daily journey. She nodded without stopping. To stop was to invite stares, to become a stationary target. "Lord have mercy, here comes ugly Eliza," whispered Cordelia Watson, the mayor's wife, loud enough to ensure Eliza heard. The other ladies tittered behind gloved hands. "They say she scared off 3 traveling salesmen last month just by smiling at them." More laughter. Eliza's fingers tightened around her satchel strap, but her pace never faltered. 23 years of practice had perfected her ability to appear deaf to their cruelty. The library sat at the far end of town, a small, brick building that had once been the mining company office before progress demanded something grander. Inside its walls, Eliza ruled a quiet kingdom of paper and ink where appearances meant nothing. Here, she could lose herself in stories of distant places and brave hearts, of people who overcame far worse than a scarred face and the petty torments of small-minded neighbors. "You're early today," observed Mrs. Holloway, the elderly widow who volunteered 3 mornings a week. Unlike the others, Agnes Holloway's eyes held no disgust when they looked upon Eliza's face, only the gentle patience of someone who had seen enough of life to know what truly mattered. "The usual morning pleasantries with Cordelia and her court," Eliza replied, hanging her shawl on the wooden peg by the door. Here, in this sanctuary, she didn't need to hide. Mrs. Holloway clicked her tongue against her teeth. "That woman needs more to occupy her mind than other people's misfortunes. Perhaps if the mayor kept her busier at night." "Agnes!" Despite herself, Eliza smiled. A crooked thing that pulled at the scar tissue along her left cheek and twisted her upper lip into something that never quite matched the right side. The childhood accident that gave her these scars had taken her mother and her future in one terrible moment of fire and panic. "Well, it's true," Mrs. Holloway sniffed, adjusting her spectacles. "Now, what shall we do about these new dime novels Buck Harrington donated? I suspect he only gave them to us because they didn't sell at his saloon." Eliza ran her fingers along the spines of the gaudy books. "The children will love them. Not everything needs to be Dickens and Shakespeare. Speaking of children, it's story hour this afternoon. Will you read again? The little ones were asking for you specifically." This brought a true smile to Eliza's face. Children, at least the younger ones before their parents' prejudices took root, didn't seem to notice her scars. To them, she was simply the lady who made stories come alive, who gave different voices to each character and answered endless questions with patience. "I've been saving Treasure Island for them," Eliza said, pulling out the library ledger. A thick, leather-bound book where she meticulously recorded every borrowed volume. Her handwriting filled page after page, a testament to the quiet service she provided this town that barely acknowledged her humanity. "Did you hear the news?" Mrs. Holloway asked, arranging fresh wildflowers in the small vase by the window. "Nathaniel Hayes is coming to town. They say he's looking to extend his railway through Coalridge." "The railway baron?" Eliza had read about him in the newspapers that came monthly. A self-made man whose transportation empire had transformed territories from untamed wilderness to connected communities. "The very same. Every unmarried woman in 3 counties will be throwing herself at him, no doubt. They say he's handsome as sin and twice as rich." Eliza's fingers traced the scar along her cheek unconsciously. "Then I suppose I have nothing to worry about." Mrs. Holloway's eyes softened. "Don't sell yourself short, my dear. Not all men are as blind as the fools in this town." Eliza said nothing, turning back to her ledger. Hope was a luxury she'd abandoned long ago, safely locked away with childhood dreams and the memory of what her face had looked like before the fire. Nathaniel Hayes arrived on a Tuesday, heralded by the thunder of hoofbeats and the distinctive chuffing of his private coach. The entire town of Coalridge seemed to pause as the procession of 4 carriages rolled down Main Street, dust billowing in their wake. Men in pressed suits and bowler hats stepped out first, followed by assistants carrying leather portfolios and surveying equipment. The gossip had begun days before, whispered over garden fences and trading counters. "They say he started with just 1 wagon," Buck Harrington told his saloon patrons. "Now he owns half the railways west of the Mississippi. I heard he's never married because no woman's good enough for him," added Cordelia Watson, who had spent 3 days having her best dress altered for the occasion. When Nathaniel himself finally emerged from the main carriage, even Eliza, watching discreetly from the library window, had to admit the stories hadn't exaggerated. Tall and broad-shouldered, he moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to commanding attention. His dark hair was touched with silver at the temples, and his tailored suit spoke of wealth worn comfortably rather than flaunted. But it was the golden spurs that caught the sunlight as he strode toward the hotel, an unexpected touch of frontier practicality on an otherwise metropolitan man. "Not what I expected," murmured Mrs. Holloway beside her. "I thought he'd be more pretentious," Eliza supplied, dropping the curtain back into place. "Soft," the older woman corrected. "But those are a horseman's hands, not a banker's." Eliza returned to shelving books. "It hardly matters what kind of hands he has. He'll be gone once he's decided whether our little town is worthy of his railway." That afternoon, Miller's general store buzzed with activity as townsfolk found reasons to shop while Nathaniel Hayes and Mayor Watson discussed business over cigars in the back office. Eliza slipped in quietly, list in hand, hoping to purchase new pencils and paper for the library without drawing attention. "Miss Morgan," Stanley Miller greeted her warmly. "What can I help you with today?" She handed him her list, conscious of the conversations dying around her as they always did when she entered a room. The silence was familiar, a momentary hush before whispers resumed, now including her name. Stanley busied himself gathering her items, his kindness a small comfort. "Heard you've got quite a crowd for story hour these days." "The children seem to enjoy it," she replied softly. "Miss Morgan knows every book in that library by heart," Stanley said, suddenly louder, addressing someone behind her. "Isn't that right, Miss Morgan?" Eliza turned, startled to find herself face to face with Nathaniel Hayes. Up close, his eyes were the deep blue of twilight, creased at the corners from years of squinting into sun and distance. "An impressive feat," Hayes said, his voice a rich baritone that matched his appearance. "I've always believed libraries are the true measure of civilization in these frontier towns." Before Eliza could respond, her elbow caught the edge of the counter, sending her carefully arranged papers fluttering to the floor. Mortification burned through her as she knelt to gather them, all too aware of the suppressed laughter from the Watson women by the fabric bolts. To her surprise, Hayes knelt beside her, gathering sheets with efficient movements. I've always found that the more valuable the document, the more likely it is to escape, he remarked conversationally, as though helping scarred spinsters was his daily custom. His fingers brushed hers as he handed over the collected papers, and Eliza withdrew her hand quickly, unused to such contact. "Thank you, Mr. Hayes," she managed, rising and clutching the papers to her chest like armor. "My pleasure, Miss Morgan," she supplied. "Eliza Morgan, the librarian," he said with a nod. "Perhaps I'll visit your establishment tomorrow. I find local histories invaluable for understanding a town's character." Something in his direct gaze made Eliza uncomfortable. Not the usual discomfort of being stared at, but something unfamiliar. He looked at her face without the telltale flicker of eyes to scar and away again that she'd grown accustomed to over the years. "We close at 5, she said, then immediately felt foolish for stating such an ordinary fact. Hayes smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his serious face. "Then I shall endeavor to arrive before 5. He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture of respect before returning to the mayor's office. Eliza paid for her purchases quickly, ignoring Cordelia's audible comment about some women knowing their place. Outside, she hurried back toward the library, her mind inexplicably dwelling on the golden glint of spurs and eyes that looked at her, truly at her, for the first time in 20 years. The following day, Eliza found herself straightening books that didn't need straightening and dusting shelves that were already clean. She had told herself repeatedly that Nathaniel Hayes wouldn't actually come. Men like him made polite conversation and empty promises. Yet each time the door opened, her heart performed an unfamiliar little jump. "You've polished that same reading lamp 3 times now," Mrs. Holloway observed with poorly concealed amusement. "Any particular reason you're so concerned with the library's appearance today?" "Spring cleaning," Eliza replied unconvincingly. "In July." The elderly woman raised an eyebrow but said nothing more, returning to her mending of torn book bindings with a knowing smile. The afternoon brought the usual crowd of children for story hour, their excited voices filling the normally quiet space. Eliza sat in her wooden chair by the bay window, sunlight casting a warm glow as she opened her copy of Treasure Island. The children settled on the braided rug before her, eyes wide with anticipation. "Who can tell me what happened when we left Jim Hawkins last week?" she asked, smiling as several small hands shot into the air. As Eliza read, giving each pirate a different gruff voice that made the children giggle, she didn't notice the tall figure who slipped quietly into the back of the room. It wasn't until she closed the book 40 minutes later, promising more adventure next week, that she saw him, Nathaniel Hayes, leaning against the far bookshelf, watching with undisguised interest. The children scattered, some returning books, others being collected by mothers who eyed the wealthy visitor with curious glances. One small girl, Emma Thatcher, paused beside Eliza's chair. "Miss Morgan, will you show me where the fairy stories are again?" she asked, her front tooth newly missing. Before Eliza could answer, Emma's mother swooped in, pulling the child firmly away. "Emma, I've told you not to bother Miss Morgan," she said, with a stiff nod to Eliza and a far warmer smile toward Hayes. "I'm sure she has more important visitors to attend to." Eliza's face burned as Mrs. Thatcher ushered Emma away, the child looking back in confusion. She busied herself collecting the scattered cushions, painfully aware of Hayes approaching. "You have quite a gift," he said, gesturing to where the children had been sitting. "I haven't heard Treasure Island brought to life like that since my grandfather read it to me." Eliza smoothed her skirt, unsure how to receive the compliment. "Children are easily entertained," she deflected. "On the contrary," Hayes replied, "children are the most discerning audience. They recognize authenticity." He glanced around the modest library. "Would you mind showing me your local history section? As I mentioned yesterday, I find it essential to understand a town's past before discussing its future. She led him to a small alcove where leather-bound journals and handwritten accounts of Coalridge's founding were carefully preserved. It's not extensive, but Mr. Morgan, my father, was meticulous about recording the town's development. Your father was the historian? The schoolteacher, she corrected, pulling down a slim volume. He believed that education and memory were a community's most valuable assets. Hayes took the book, his fingers brushing hers again. This time, she didn't pull away quite so quickly. He opened it carefully, revealing neat handwriting chronicling the discovery of silver that had transformed Coalridge from hunting camp to mining town. A wise man, Hayes murmured. My own father could neither read nor write, but he understood the value of knowledge. He paid for my schooling with a decade of back-breaking labor. The personal revelation surprised Eliza. Nothing in Hayes's polished appearance suggested such humble beginnings. Yet now you own railways, she observed, and still value a good book more than gold. He smiled, revealing a slight dimple in his right cheek. From his pocket, he withdrew a small volume bound in green leather. Perhaps a trade? I'll borrow your father's history, and leave this in your care until I return. Eliza accepted the book, reading its gold-embossed title, Pride and Prejudice. You've read Austen? She asked, unable to mask her surprise. Is that so difficult to believe? There was gentle amusement in his eyes. Most men prefer adventure tales, while most women prefer romance, he countered. I've found assumptions rarely capture the complexity of individual taste. He tapped the cover. The marginalia is mine, I'm afraid. A bad habit from student days. Eliza opened to a random page, finding neat annotations in a strong hand. Rather than simply underlining passages, Hayes had engaged with the text, questioning, connecting, appreciating the author's wit. I should return tomorrow if convenient, he said, tucking her father's history book carefully into his coat. Perhaps we might discuss which of Austen's heroines is most misunderstood by society. After he left, Eliza stood holding the book, struck by the strange sensation that she had just experienced the most genuine conversation of her adult life. She traced the gilt lettering on the cover, wondering what hidden notes awaited within, and why a man who could converse with anyone had chosen to speak with her. Coalridge's social hierarchy was as clearly defined as the layers of rock in the nearby silver mines. At its peak sat Mayor Watson and his wife Cordelia, who ruled the town's social calendar with an iron grip thinly disguised as civic duty. Their weekly salon was where fortunes rose or fell on the winds of gossip, where marriages were practically arranged, and where the ambitious curried favor with practiced smiles. Today, the Watson parlor overflowed with Coalridge's elite, drawn by Cordelia's hastily arranged welcome reception for their distinguished visitor. Crystal glasses clinked while servants circulated with trays of tiny sandwiches imported at great expense from Denver. I've decided to host a proper dinner on Saturday, Cordelia announced, her voice carrying over the chatter. Something truly worthy of our guest's stature. Mr. Hayes has been too consumed by business matters to experience Coalridge's finer offerings. Will you be inviting the entire town council? Asked Benjamin Harker, whose new shirt collar was uncomfortably tight around his neck. Only those who contribute meaningfully to our community's cultural advancement. Cordelia replied with a thin smile that excluded half the room. Quality over quantity, as they say in New York society. Across the room, Nathaniel Hayes maintained the pleasant expression of a man accustomed to such gatherings, while his attention repeatedly drifted toward the grandfather clock. 2 hours before the library closed. Mr. Hayes, simpered Louisa Parker, the unmarried daughter of the assay office manager. I understand you've been visiting our humble library. How quaint. Though I imagine it hardly compares to the collections you're accustomed to. On the contrary, Miss Parker, he replied. I find small libraries often contain unexpected treasures. Your librarian has assembled a remarkably thoughtful collection. A moment of awkward silence followed before Louisa recovered. "Oh, you mean Miss Morgan? Yes, she's been with us for goodness forever, I suppose. A charity position, really. After the accident, her prospects were rather limited." "Accident?" Hayes inquired, his tone neutral but his eyes sharpening. "A terrible fire when she was a girl," supplied Cordelia, inserting herself into the conversation. "Her mother perished and Eliza was... well, you've seen her face. The town has been most generous, allowing her to maintain the library position her father once held. Though between us," she lowered her voice conspiratorially, "some feel it's inappropriate having someone so unsettling working with the children." Hayes's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I found Miss Morgan to be an exceptional storyteller." The children seemed quite captivated. "Well, children can be rather indiscriminate in their attentions." Cordelia laughed lightly. "Now, regarding Saturday's dinner, I do hope you'll honor us with your presence. My cook prepares a roast duck that's been praised as far as Denver." "Unfortunately, I have prior commitments that evening," Hayes replied smoothly. "Business correspondence that cannot wait." Cordelia's smile faltered. "Perhaps Sunday, then?" "You're very kind, but I prefer not to make social engagements on the Sabbath." He checked his pocket watch. "If you'll excuse me, I promised Miss Morgan I would return her father's historical account today." After Hayes's departure, the parlor erupted in speculative chatter. "Did he say he had plans with the librarian?" Louisa asked incredulously. "Impossible," Cordelia declared, though a hint of doubt colored her voice. "He's merely being polite. A man of his standing would never. $10 says he's just using her to learn about property values," Buck Harrington interjected. "Smart business strategy. Getting information from someone desperate for attention." "20 says he hasn't even noticed her face," countered Frederick Palmer, the banker's son. "Men like that only see dollar signs." "50 says I'll have him at my dinner table within a fortnight," Cordelia announced, silencing the room. "Wealthy men may indulge in peculiar amusements, but they always return to proper society." Outside the Watson home, unaware of the wagers being placed on his intentions, Nathaniel Hayes strode purposefully toward the library. The town bulletin board caught his attention as he passed. A weathered wooden structure outside the general store covered with notices of livestock auctions, church socials, and lost pets. Prominently displayed was a new announcement, written in Cordelia's flourishing hand. "Town Improvement Committee Meeting. Discussion of railway proposals and library relocation. All property owners welcome." Hayes frowned, making a mental note as he continued toward the small brick building at the edge of town. Inside, Eliza was helping an elderly man select a book of poetry, her voice soft but animated as she described different collections. She looked up as the bell above the door announced Hayes's arrival, and for just a moment her professional mask slipped, revealing something that might have been pleasure at his return. The elderly man glanced between them, nodded knowingly, and made a hasty selection. "Don't let me keep you, Miss Morgan. I believe you have more important matters to attend to." Unlike Mrs. Thatcher's similar words the day before, his held no malice, only a gentle understanding that made Eliza's cheeks warm as she recorded his borrowed book in the ledger. "I believe I promised to return this," Hayes said when they were alone, presenting her father's history book, "and to discuss whether Elizabeth Bennet was justified in her prejudices." Their discussion of Austen's characters stretched from that afternoon into the next 3 days. Nathaniel Hayes appeared at the library each day, sometimes with questions about local property records, sometimes with observations about character motivations in Pride and Prejudice. Each conversation left Eliza more confused about his intentions, and more guarded against the hope flickering to life inside her. "You disagree with Darcy's initial assessment of country society?" she asked on the third afternoon, arranging returned books while Hayes leaned against the circulation desk. "Not entirely," he replied, watching her methodical movements. But his mistake was assuming uniformity, that all country society was beneath his notice. He failed to look for exceptions. Perhaps he was simply being practical. Exceptions are rare and require effort to find. Eliza shelved the last book, avoiding his gaze. The rarity makes the discovery more valuable, Hayes countered. Like finding silver in these hills when others saw only worthless rock. Before Eliza could respond, the library door burst open and Mayor Watson strode in, his usual pomposity amplified by Nathaniel's presence. "Ah, Hayes, thought I might find you here. Been looking all over town." He nodded curtly to Eliza. "Miss Morgan." "Mayor," she acknowledged quietly, withdrawing to the back shelves to give them privacy, though she could still hear their conversation. "My Cordelia is absolutely determined you won't escape town without experiencing proper Coalridge hospitality," the mayor said heartily. "She's planned a special dinner tomorrow evening. All the prominent citizens will attend." "I won't take no for an answer this time." Hayes's response was measured. "I appreciate the invitation, but I found myself quite comfortably occupied with my research here." "Surely that can wait," Watson insisted. "This dinner is in your honor, after all. Cordelia's ordered a new tablecloth all the way from Denver." "Then I must not disappoint Mrs. Watson," Hayes conceded, though something in his tone suggested reluctance. "However, I have one condition." "Name it." "Anything at all. I'd like Miss Morgan to attend as well." The silence that followed was so complete that Eliza could hear the clock ticking from across the room. A book slipped from her fingers, thudding softly on the wooden floor. "Miss Morgan?" the mayor repeated, his voice strained. "Surely you jest." "Not at all," Hayes replied evenly. "I found her historical knowledge invaluable to my understanding of Coalridge. It seems only right that she participate in discussions about the town's future." Mayor Watson sputtered. But she's not. That is to say, typically the librarian wouldn't. Is there some objection I'm unaware of?" Hayes's tone remained pleasant, but something steely had entered it. "I understood Mrs. Watson wished to showcase Coalridge's finest attributes. Surely your town's dedication to knowledge and history qualifies." Trapped, the mayor forced a smile. "Of course. No objection whatsoever. We'll expect you both at 7. He nodded stiffly to Eliza, who had emerged from the shelves, before departing in visible discomfort. When the door closed, Eliza found her voice. "Why did you do that?" Hayes turned, eyebrows raised. "Was I mistaken in thinking you might enjoy an evening of conversation beyond these walls? You know very well that's not." She stopped, gathering her composure. "Mr. Hayes, I don't know what game you're playing, but I have no interest in being its pawn." "Game?" His expression sobered. "Is it so difficult to believe I simply enjoy your company?" "Yes," she answered bluntly. "Men like you don't seek the company of women like me without ulterior motives. I've observed enough of humanity to know that much." Hayes stepped closer, close enough that Eliza could see flecks of gray in his blue eyes. "Perhaps you've observed the wrong segment of humanity. Or perhaps I'm an exception that proves your rule." "I don't attend social gatherings," she said firmly. "I haven't in 20 years. "Then it's long overdue." He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew an envelope, placing it on the desk between them. "My formal invitation, independent of the mayor's. Accept or decline as you wish, but do so based on your desires, not the expectations of others." The envelope was cream-colored and heavy, her name written across it in strong, elegant script. Eliza stared at it as though it might bite. "Why?" she asked simply. Hayes considered her for a moment. "Because in a town full of people performing roles they think they should play, you're the only person who speaks to me as though I'm a man rather than a bank account." He touched the brim of his hat in a small salute. "Good day, Miss Morgan. I hope to see you tomorrow evening." After he left, Eliza picked up the envelope with trembling fingers. In 20 years, she had received exactly 3 pieces of personal mail: a letter of condolence after her father's death, a Christmas card from Mrs. Holloway each year, and a note from the school board confirming her appointment as librarian. Never an invitation. She slid her finger under the seal, unfolding the single card inside with its simple message: "The pleasure of your company is requested." Below, he had written in the same strong hand as his book annotations: "Some conversations are too interesting to be limited by library hours. You must go," Mrs. Holloway insisted, sitting in Eliza's small cottage later that evening. "It's high time this town remembered you're more than your scars." "They've never forgotten I'm my scars," Eliza corrected, placing a cup of tea before her friend. "That's precisely the problem." The invitation lay open on the table between them, its elegant script seeming to mock her hesitation. Eliza had closed the library early, too distracted by warring emotions to concentrate on her duties. She'd immediately sought Mrs. Holloway's counsel, though she suspected what the older woman would say. "Nonsense. You're letting fear make your decisions." Mrs. Holloway sipped her tea thoughtfully. "I was beautiful. Once, you know." Eliza looked up, startled by the unexpected statement. "Don't look so surprised," the widow chuckled. "I wasn't always 73 with wrinkles and liver spots. At 20, I had suitors lining up from here to Denver." "I never doubted it," Eliza said softly. "You're still beautiful. Kind, but not accurate." Mrs. Holloway set down her cup. "Beauty fades, Eliza. Mine started slipping away after 40, and by 50 it was gone. Men who once couldn't take their eyes off me suddenly looked through me as if I were glass. Women who'd envied me stopped seeing me as competition. I became invisible." "That sounds familiar," Eliza murmured. "Exactly my point. But I had 30 years of being seen first. You never had that chance." She reached across the table, her veined hand covering Eliza's. "Beauty is the most temporary gift, yet people build entire lives around it, giving it or pursuing it. Meanwhile, the things that last, kindness, intelligence, courage, go unnoticed until beauty steps aside." Eliza stared into her tea. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that Nathaniel Hayes sees what others don't because he's looking for something different." Mrs. Holloway stood abruptly. "Wait here." She disappeared into Eliza's bedroom and returned carrying a large wooden box that Eliza recognized as her friend's prized possession, brought all the way from Boston decades earlier. "I've been saving these for the right occasion," Mrs. Holloway said, opening the box to reveal carefully folded fabric. "I think tonight qualifies." She lifted out a dress the color of autumn leaves, deep russet silk with delicate beading at the modest neckline and cuffs. The style was from another era, but somehow timeless in its elegance. "I can't possibly," Eliza began. "You can and you will," Mrs. Holloway interrupted. "I wore this to meet President Grant in '69. Thomas said I outshone every woman in Washington that night." Her voice softened at the mention of her late husband. "It deserves another evening of significance." An hour later, Eliza stood before her small mirror, hardly recognizing herself. The dress fit surprisingly well, needing only minor adjustments at the waist. Mrs. Holloway had insisted on arranging her hair too, twisting the dark brown strands into a simple but elegant knot at the nape of her neck. "Your eyes are the same color as the dress," Mrs. Holloway observed, standing back to admire her work. "I always said they were your best feature." Eliza touched her scarred cheek self-consciously. "No one will notice my eyes." "He already has," the older woman replied simply. "Now, what about your shawl?" Eliza reached for the familiar gray wool that had been her shield for 20 years, but Mrs. Holloway intercepted her hand. "No," she said firmly. "No more hiding." "I can't," Eliza whispered, panic rising. "I can't walk through town with everyone staring." Mrs. Holloway considered this, then nodded. You're right, but not for the reason you think. She disappeared again, returning with a different shawl, fine cream-colored cashmere embroidered with subtle golden thread. If you must wear one, wear it as an accessory, not armor. The walk to the mayor's house was the longest of Eliza's life. Each step on the plank sidewalk seemed to echo through the evening air, announcing her presumption in attending a gathering where she'd never been welcome. Twice she nearly turned back, but Mrs. Holloway's words kept her moving forward. Some acts of courage look small to others but require mountains of strength. As she approached the mayor's house, light spilled from every window, and the sound of conversation and laughter floated on the night air. Carriages lined the street, their horses occasionally stamping in their traces. Several couples climbed the steps ahead of her, the women in colorful silks and satins, the men in dark suits and string ties. Eliza paused at the bottom of the steps, her courage faltering. Then, through the open door, she glimpsed Nathaniel Hayes standing in the entry hall, his gaze moving restlessly over each new arrival. When his eyes found her, something in his expression changed. A subtle shift from polite attention to genuine interest. He moved to the doorway, watching as she slowly climbed the steps. With each footfall, whispers spread among the guests who noticed her approach. By the time she reached the top, a small silence had fallen over the entryway. "Miss Morgan," Hayes said, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet. "I'm delighted you came." He offered his arm as naturally as if they'd been attending functions together for years. As she placed her hand on his sleeve, Eliza let the cream shawl slip back from her face for the first time in 20 years of public appearances. The gasps were audible, but whether from shock at her scars or surprise at her transformation, she couldn't tell. And for the first time, she realized it didn't matter. Dinner at the Watson residence was an elaborate affair designed to impress. Fine china and crystal gleamed under the chandelier's light, while servants in starched aprons circulated with silver platters. Cordelia Watson presided at one end of the long table, her husband at the other, with Nathaniel Hayes placed in the position of honor at Cordelia's right. To the hostess's barely concealed dismay, Hayes had firmly requested that Eliza be seated across from him, displacing Louisa Parker, who had been meticulously positioned for optimal flirtation opportunities. The seating rearrangement had caused a flurry of whispered consultations and hurried place card adjustments. "Miss Morgan," Cordelia said with brittle politeness as everyone took their seats. "What an unexpected pleasure. I don't believe you've attended one of our little gatherings before." "Not since her father's time," offered Judge Harrison from further down the table. "Morgan was quite the scholar. Taught my oldest boy his letters." The old judge was one of the few who remembered Eliza before the fire, and occasionally acknowledged her existence with a nod on the street. "How interesting," Cordelia replied, clearly finding it anything but. "Mr. Hayes, you simply must try this roast. The secret is in the rosemary butter." Throughout the first courses, Eliza remained silent, eating little, acutely aware of the glances directed her way. Some curious, others hostile, none welcoming. She kept her eyes on her plate, falling back on decades of practiced invisibility. "Miss Morgan," Hayes said during a lull in conversation, his voice cutting through the artificially bright chatter around them, "I've been meaning to ask your opinion on the railway expansion. As someone who understands the town's history, do you think the southern or northern route would better serve Coalridge's future?" The table fell silent. No one ever asked Eliza's opinion on civic matters. She looked up, meeting his gaze directly. "The northern route passes through fewer established homesteads, requiring less displacement. It would also place the station closer to the school and existing businesses. But the southern approach offers better grades for the heavy or cars," countered Benjamin Harker, surprise giving way to genuine engagement. "Less coal burned on the climb." "True," Eliza acknowledged, "but the northern route follows the old Butterfield stagecoach road. The foundations for bridges over the creek are already in place, saving considerable construction costs." Hayes smiled, a gleam of approval in his eyes. "You've given this serious thought." "The library window faces north," she replied simply. "I've had 20 years to consider the landscape." From there, the conversation unexpectedly blossomed. Hayes deftly drew Eliza into discussions of literature, local geography, and the history of mining in the territory. When she spoke of the town's founding families, even Cordelia was forced to defer to her encyclopedic knowledge of who had arrived when and established what. "Miss Morgan's father kept the town records for decades," Hayes explained to the table at large. "She's inherited his remarkable memory for detail." "Not just memory," Judge Harrison interjected unexpectedly. "Morgan always said his daughter had the sharpest mind he'd ever encountered. Said it was a crime she couldn't attend university." "A woman at university?" scoffed Buck Harrington. "What would be the point?" "Education is never pointless," Hayes replied coolly. "Some of the finest minds I've encountered in business belong to women. My head accountant in Denver is a woman, graduate of Oberlin College." The dessert course arrived, Cordelia's prized apple tart, accompanied by news that the town musicians had set up in the parlor for dancing. As the guests rose from the table, Hayes approached Eliza. "Would you honor me with the first dance?" he asked quietly. Eliza froze. "I don't dance, Mr. Hayes." "Have you tried?" "Not since I was 12, she admitted. "And never successfully." His smile was gentle. "Then we'll muddle through together. I'm considered only marginally competent myself." Before she could protest further, he had escorted her to the parlor where 3 local men with fiddles and a small piano awaited. Cordelia's face tightened when Hayes approached the musicians, making a quiet request. The opening notes of a simple waltz filled the room. Hayes guided Eliza to the center of the floor, one hand at her waist, the other clasping hers. "Just follow my lead," he murmured. 3 simple steps, repeated. Eliza was acutely aware of every eye in the room fixed upon them as they began to move. Her first steps were stiff, awkward with self-consciousness, but Hayes moved with such calm assurance that she gradually relaxed, finding the rhythm of the music. "There," he said softly. "You see? Not so difficult." "They're all staring," she whispered. "Let them," he replied. "I'm too busy looking at you to notice." Her eyes met his, and for a moment, the room around them seemed to fade. She was conscious only of the music, their movement together, and the steady blue of his gaze that never once shifted to her scars. "You're doing this deliberately," she said as he guided her through a turn. "Creating a spectacle." "I'm dancing with the most interesting woman in the room," he corrected. "If others find that spectacular, that's their concern, not ours." From the edge of the room, Cordelia Watson watched with thinly veiled outrage as other couples joined the dance, the novelty of Eliza's presence gradually giving way to the usual patterns of socializing. When the waltz ended, Hayes led Eliza to a quiet corner near the open doors to the garden, where the summer night air provided relief from the crowded parlor. "Well done," he said. "For someone who hasn't danced in 23 years, you're remarkably graceful." Before she could respond, Cordelia materialized beside them, her smile fixed. "Mr. Hayes, the judge is most eager to discuss the water rights for your proposed depot, and Louisa has been practicing a special piece on the piano just for this evening." From across the room, Eliza heard clearly what Cordelia thought was a whisper to her friend. "Can you believe the nerve? Dancing with ugly Eliza like she belongs here. There must be something wrong with his eyes." The familiar words shouldn't have had the power to wound after so many years, but tonight, when she had dared to step beyond her boundaries, they cut unexpectedly deep. Eliza slipped away while Cordelia reclaimed Nathaniel's attention, moving swiftly through the French doors into the garden. The night air cooled her burning cheeks as she followed a gravel path deeper into the shadows, away from the golden light spilling from the house. 23 years of mockery should have hardened her against such barbs. Yet tonight they found fresh wounds. A stone bench beckoned beneath an apple tree, and she sank onto it, adjusting Mrs. Holloway's borrowed dress with careful hands. How foolish she'd been to imagine, even for a moment, that she could step outside the narrow confines of the life Coalridge had assigned her. One dance, one evening of conversation, and she'd allowed herself to forget what everyone else saw when they looked at her. "Miss Morgan," she tensed at Hayes's voice behind her. Of course he would follow. His unfailing politeness wouldn't allow him to ignore her abrupt departure. She composed her features into a mask of dignity before turning. "Mr. Hayes, you should return to your admirers. I'm merely getting some air." He remained standing, moonlight silvering the edges of his dark hair. "I heard what Mrs. Watson said." "As did I," Eliza replied evenly. "It was nothing I haven't heard 1,000 times before. That doesn't make it acceptable." Something in his voice, a controlled anger, surprised her. "Why does it trouble you?" she asked. "You've known me barely a week. The opinions of Coalridge about a scarred librarian cannot possibly matter to a man who will leave as soon as his business concludes." Instead of answering, Hayes sat beside her on the bench, leaving proper distance between them. For several minutes, they sat in silence, listening to the night sounds of crickets and distant music from the house. "My mother had a scar," he said finally, his voice low, "from her temple to her jaw, much like yours. A horse kicked her when she was 19. Eliza turned to him, surprised by the personal revelation. "My father said he fell in love with her the day after her accident," Hayes continued. "She was working in her father's store, face half-bandaged, enduring the stares of customers with such quiet dignity that he couldn't look away." "A romantic story," Eliza murmured. "A true one." Hayes shifted slightly, his profile strong against the night sky. "She was beautiful, not despite her scar but with it. It was part of who she was, like her laugh or the way she hummed while kneading bread. Your mother was fortunate to find someone who saw beyond appearances. My father was fortunate to have the wisdom to see what others missed." His voice took on a distant quality. "In Denver, I attend functions where women paint their faces and cinch their waists and say only what they believe others wish to hear. They're like porcelain dolls. Perfect, identical, and empty of anything genuine." He turned to face her directly. "When I arrived in Coalridge, I expected more of the same. Mrs. Watson and her ilk exist in every town. What I didn't expect was to find someone who speaks her mind without calculation, who discusses Austin with genuine insight, who reads to children with voices that make pirates come alive." Eliza's breath caught. "Mr. Hayes." "Nathaniel," he corrected gently. "After a waltz, I think first names are permitted." "Nathaniel," she conceded, the name unfamiliar on her tongue. "I don't know what you want from me." "Conversation," he replied simply. "The pleasure of your company without pretense. I've had precious little of either in recent years. People will talk. People always talk. The question is whether we grant them power over our choices." He hesitated, then added, "I understand your caution. A lifetime of cruelty teaches wariness. But I'm not Coalridge, Eliza. I see you, not your scars." The use of her given name, spoken with such quiet certainty, broke something loose inside her. A knot of defensiveness she'd carried so long she'd forgotten it wasn't part of her original self. "I was 12 when it happened," she said, the words emerging unbidden. "We were asleep when the fire started. The lamp in Mother's room somehow overturned. Father was away teaching at an outlying homestead." She touched her cheek unconsciously. "I tried to reach Mother, but a burning beam fell. The doctor said I was lucky. An inch closer and I would have lost my eye." "And your mother?" he asked softly. "She never woke." Eliza looked down at her hands, surprised to find them steady. "Afterward, everything changed. Children who had been my friends crossed the street to avoid me. Their mothers whispered, 'Poor thing,' while ensuring their daughters understood I was now different, damaged. Within a year, I was ugly Eliza. What did your father do? He defended me until his dying day. Taught me that the library could be my sanctuary when the world was unkind. She smiled faintly. He said books don't judge by covers, despite the saying. A wise man, Nathaniel said. I wish I could have known him. A comfortable silence settled between them, more intimate than any conversation. From the house came the sudden sound of laughter and footsteps approaching the garden. I should go, Eliza said, rising. It's late, and I've imposed on Mrs. Holloway's dress long enough. Nathaniel stood as well. May I walk you home? That would cause even more talk. Then I'll cause talk, he replied with a hint of stubbornness. The night air is pleasant, and your company more so. Before she could answer, Mayor Watson's voice boomed from the terrace. Hayes, there you are. The banker's waiting to discuss financing options for the depot. Nathaniel's expression flickered with annoyance before settling into polite resignation. It seems business calls. It always does, Eliza said with unexpected understanding. Good night, Mr. Hayes, Nathaniel. Thank you for the dance. Until tomorrow, he replied, the words both question and promise. As Eliza slipped through the garden gate into the back lane, she realized she was clutching the cream shawl in her hands rather than wearing it. She had forgotten, for the entire conversation, to hide by mid-morning the next day. All of Coalridge knew that Nathaniel Hayes had danced with Eliza Morgan and followed her into the garden. The story grew with each retelling. They had held hands. He had kissed her. They had been discovered in a passionate embrace. The truth, as usual, was deemed too mundane for proper gossip. Eliza felt the change immediately as she walked to the library. Instead of the usual averted gazes and whispers, people stared openly, some with naked curiosity, others with thinly veiled hostility. Several women who normally ignored her existence entirely now scrutinized her face as if searching for some previously overlooked quality that might explain Hayes's attention. Heard you made quite the impression last night, Stanley Miller said as she passed his store. Unlike the others, his expression held genuine warmth. About time someone noticed there's more to you than old stories. Eliza managed a small smile. Thank you, Stanley. But people are making far too much of simple courtesy. Courtesy doesn't make a man dance with only one woman all evening, Stanley replied with a knowing look. My Mary says Hayes didn't take his eyes off you once. Heat rose in Eliza's cheeks. Your Mary is exaggerating. She continued her walk, head high despite the stairs. As she approached the library, she spotted a cluster of women outside its doors. Cordelia Watson and her closest allies, dressed in morning visiting clothes, their expressions suggesting a mission rather than a social call. Miss Morgan, Cordelia called with artificial brightness. We were just discussing the library committee. It's been simply ages since we've properly evaluated the town's literary needs. Eliza unlocked the door, maintaining her composure with practiced skill. I wasn't aware Coalridge had a library committee, Mrs. Watson. Well, that's precisely the issue, isn't it? Cordelia followed her inside, trailed by her companions. The mayor feels it's time for more oversight. After all, the town has grown considerably since your father's day. I submit quarterly reports to the town council, Eliza replied, moving behind the circulation desk. They've expressed no concerns about the library's management. Oh, it's not about management, Cordelia waved dismissively. It's about modernization. For instance, these old shelves are terribly outdated. And the children's section, well, it's hardly appropriate for impressionable minds to have such unrestricted access to just any book. The true purpose of the visit became clear. This was retaliation for last night, an attempt to assert control over the one domain where Eliza held authority. Before she could respond, the door opened again, and Nathaniel Hayes entered, a leather portfolio under his arm. He stopped, taking in the tableau of Cordelia's impromptu committee confronting Eliza. Ladies, He greeted them with a tip of his hat. What a pleasant surprise to find such enthusiasm for literature so early in the day. Cordelia's demeanor transformed instantly. Mr. Hayes, how fortunate. We were just discussing plans to improve Coalridge's cultural offerings. As I was telling Miss Morgan, the current library arrangements are woefully inadequate for a growing town. Indeed, Hayes arched an eyebrow. I find that surprising, given the exceptional curation of the collection. Few towns this size boast such a balanced selection of classics and contemporary works. His deliberate praise silenced Cordelia momentarily. He continued, setting his portfolio on the desk. In fact, I was hoping to consult with Miss Morgan about the educational provisions in my railway development plans. I never build a station without considering its impact on local cultural institutions. He opened the portfolio, revealing detailed architectural drawings. Miss Morgan, would you be kind enough to give me your opinion on these proposed layouts? I value your practical experience. Stunned by this unexpected alliance, Eliza moved closer to examine the plans. The drawings showed not just a railway station, but an integrated complex including expanded public facilities. You've included a reading room, she observed, studying the detailed floor plans. Adjacent to the passenger waiting area, he confirmed. My experience suggests travelers appreciate quality reading material during delays. I was hoping you might advise on appropriate selections. Cordelia cleared her throat, clearly displeased at being sidelined. Mr. Hayes, while literary matters are charming diversions, surely the town council should be your first consultants on such significant developments. Rest assured, Mrs. Watson, I'll present these plans to the council tomorrow. His smile remained pleasant but dismissive. However, as Miss Morgan will be directly affected by any changes to the town's educational resources, her input is invaluable at this preliminary stage. The implied status this conferred, Eliza consulted before even the council, was not lost on Cordelia or her friends. With poorly concealed indignation, they made their excuses and departed, leaving behind promises to continue their discussion of the library committee at a more convenient time. When they were alone, Eliza exhaled slowly. Thank you for the timely intervention. Not at all, Hayes replied, genuinely focused on the plans before them. I actually do want your opinion on these designs. The railway will transform Coalridge. I'd prefer that transformation benefit the entire community, not just its commercial interests. He pulled out a chair for her at the reading table, treating her expertise with a respect she'd rarely experienced. As they bent over the drawings together, Hayes explaining his vision while soliciting her suggestions, Eliza felt a strange new sensation, the quiet confidence of being valued for her mind rather than judged for her face. The children would love a dedicated story corner, she found herself saying, pointing to a space in the proposed reading room. Perhaps with lower shelves they can reach themselves. Hayes nodded, making notes in the margin. Excellent suggestion. What else would you include if resources were no obstacle? For the next hour, they collaborated as equals, her practical knowledge complementing his broader vision. When he finally gathered the plans to leave, Hayes paused. Would you join me for lunch? I've had a basket prepared at the hotel. We could continue our discussion in the town square, weather permitting. The invitation, casual, public, undeniably social, represented another step beyond the boundaries that had defined her life for decades. Eliza hesitated only briefly before nodding. I'd like that, she said simply. As they walked together down Main Street toward the square, the stairs that followed them seemed to matter less with each step. Whatever Coalridge thought of their unlikely friendship, for the first time in years, Eliza found herself caring more about the conversation at hand than the whispers behind her back. The private dining room of the Coalridge Hotel had never hosted such a contentious gathering. 6 of the town's most influential men sat around a polished oak table, their faces reflecting varying degrees of concern and calculation. Mayor Watson presided at the head, his usual bluster subdued into serious purpose. Gentlemen, I called this meeting because we face a situation requiring immediate attention. Watson began, his voice low despite the closed door. Hayes's behavior has become concerning. Buck Harrington, the saloon owner, snorted. You mean him making eyes at ugly Eliza? That's your emergency. It's more complicated, interjected Benjamin Harker, tapping his fingers nervously on the table. I had my clerk review Hayes's land purchases. He's buying property throughout the north side, not just for the railway, but adjacent parcels too. The north side, repeated Frederick Palmer, the banker's son. Where the library stands. Watson nodded grimly. And where Miss Morgan holds considerable influence, as her father owned several properties she now rents to tenants. Properties that, significantly, Hayes has not yet acquired. Understanding dawned across the men's faces. You think he's using her to manipulate property prices? Judge Harrison asked, his age-lined face troubled. That seems unnecessarily elaborate. Hayes could simply make her an offer directly. Unless she refused, Watson countered. Morgan was stubborn about his land, and the daughters just as bad. She declined 3 offers for the library plot over the years, claiming her father wanted it preserved for public use. Palmer leaned forward. So Hayes courts her favor, perhaps convinces her to sell or support his development plans, and secures the last properties he needs at favorable rates. While we've been scratching our heads over why a man like him would waste time on a spinster librarian, Watson concluded. Buck Harrington chuckled. I'll be damned. Almost have to admire the strategy. Only Judge Harrison seemed unconvinced. It's conjecture at best. I've known Eliza since she was born. She's no fool to be easily manipulated, even by a charming railroad man. Irrelevant, Watson dismissed. What matters is that Hayes is bypassing proper channels, meaning us to advance his agenda. Gentlemen, we must ensure Coalridge's future isn't determined by backroom deals with a scarred librarian. Across town, unaware of the meeting, Eliza was experiencing the most remarkable afternoon of her adult life. Following their lunch in the square, which had drawn stares but also several genuine greetings from townsfolk who normally ignored her, Nathaniel had accompanied her back to the library, where they continued discussing books, architecture, and his travels. You've never left Colorado? He asked, seeming genuinely surprised as they shelved returned books together. Eliza shook her head. Father planned to take me to Boston for university before. She gestured vaguely toward her face. Afterward, he couldn't bear to leave the town where Mother was buried. And then he was gone too, and the library became my responsibility. But surely you've wanted to see other places? The cities you've read about. Wanting and having are different matters, she replied practically. Besides, the stares are the same everywhere. At least here, the mockery is familiar. Nathaniel's expression darkened. Not everyone stares with cruelty, Eliza. There are places where differences aren't remarked upon. Cities where thousands pass each other daily with barely a glance. Perhaps, she conceded. But my life is here. It doesn't have to be, he said quietly, then seemed to catch himself. Forgive me. That was presumptuous. An awkward silence fell between them, broken when Mrs. Holloway bustled in, her usual punctuality abandoned for obvious curiosity about the development of their relationship. My goodness, Mr. Hayes, you're becoming our most dedicated patron, she observed with twinkling eyes. I can't recall the last time anyone visited 3 days running. The company is exceptional, he replied smoothly, earning an approving nod from the older woman. Later, after Nathaniel departed for a business meeting, Mrs. Holloway cornered Eliza between the history and natural science sections. Well? She demanded without preamble. Well, what? Eliza replied, though the warmth in her cheeks betrayed her. Don't play coy. The entire town is talking about you two parading around the square like sweethearts. Stanley Miller says Hayes couldn't take his eyes off you. We discussed his railway plans, Eliza protested weakly. It was hardly a romantic assignation. Humph. And I suppose he held your chair and ordered all your favorite foods by coincidence. When Eliza's eyes widened in surprise, Mrs. Holloway chuckled. Small towns, dear. No secrets. It's not what people think, Eliza insisted. He values my local knowledge, nothing more. Keep telling yourself that, Mrs. Holloway replied skeptically. Meanwhile, Cordelia Watson is fit to be tied, and half the eligible ladies in town are questioning every feature they once thought perfect. The following morning, Eliza arrived at the library to find an envelope slipped under the door. Inside was a short note in Nathaniel's now familiar handwriting. Business in Denver requires my attention for 3 days. Would you consider dining with me Friday evening at the hotel restaurant? I find I'm already missing our conversations. The invitation sent a flutter through her chest that was both exhilarating and terrifying. A public dinner, explicitly social, impossible to misconstrue as business. She was still contemplating her response when the day's mail delivery arrived, containing a second, very different note. Anonymous, the handwriting deliberately disguised. Not everything is as it appears. Ask yourself why a man like Hayes would suddenly notice ugly Eliza after all these years. Property records don't lie. The cruel nickname, written in stark black ink, struck like a physical blow. Worse was the insidious doubt the message planted, feeding the insecurities she'd battled since Nathaniel's unexpected attention began. She sank into her chair, the two notes side by side on the desk before her, one warm with possibility, the other cold with familiar judgment. Outside, Coalridge continued its daily rhythms, but inside the quiet library, Eliza felt the ground shifting beneath her hard-won stability. For 3 days, doubt festered in Eliza's mind like an old wound reopened. She researched land records in the town archives, discovering that Nathaniel had indeed purchased numerous properties along the proposed Northern Railway route, all except the parcels she had inherited from her father, including the lot where the library stood. The anonymous note's insinuation seemed increasingly plausible. What had initially appeared as genuine interest might simply be calculated business strategy. The thought brought both pain and a strange relief, the familiar comfort of confirmed expectations after the disorienting hope of recent weeks. By Friday, Eliza had composed a polite note declining Nathaniel's dinner invitation, citing library obligations. She was sealing the envelope when the door opened, bringing not the messenger boy she expected but Nathaniel himself, his tall figure silhouetted against the late afternoon light. "I hope to catch you before you closed," he said, removing his hat. Denver business concluded faster than anticipated. Eliza quickly slid the envelope beneath a stack of papers. "Welcome back, Mr. Hayes." His eyebrows rose at the formal address they had abandoned days ago. "Is something wrong?" "Not at all," she replied, her voice carefully neutral as she busied herself with the ledger. "I trust your business was successful?" Nathaniel studied her, clearly sensing the change. "It was productive, though I found myself surprisingly eager to return to Coalridge." He approached the desk, setting down a small package wrapped in brown paper. "I brought you something." Despite her resolve, curiosity pulled Eliza's eyes to the package. Nathaniel unwrapped it, revealing a leather-bound book with gold embossing, Jane Eyre, by Charlotte Bronte. "First edition," he said. "I remembered you mentioned it was a favorite." The thoughtfulness of the gift, remembering a passing comment from their literary discussions, momentarily undermined her suspicions. Then she recalled Mayor Watson's words about Hayes's famous business acumen. What was an expensive book compared to valuable land acquisitions? "Thank you, but I cannot accept it," she said stiffly. Nathaniel's smile faded. "Eliza, what's happened?" The direct question, combined with 3 days of building tension, broke through her careful composure. "Why are you really in Coalridge, Mr. Hayes?" Surprise registered on his face. "For the railway expansion. You've seen the plans. And your interest in the northern route?" The one that passes by properties I happen to own. Understanding dawned in his eyes. You think my attention has been some sort of business strategy? Hasn't it? Eliza pushed the ledger aside, meeting his gaze directly. A successful businessman suddenly takes interest in the town spinster who happens to control key properties needed for his development. It makes perfect sense. To whom? He asked sharply. Who suggested this to you? Eliza withdrew the anonymous note from her desk drawer, sliding it across to him. Nathaniel read it, his expression darkening. Cowards, he muttered, setting the note down. Unable to compete fairly, they resort to poisoning what they don't understand. Is it untrue? She challenged. Have you not been acquiring property along the northern route? Of course I have. It's the superior path for the railway, as you yourself pointed out. He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. Eliza, if I wanted your property, I would have made an offer through my agents like any other business transaction. I wouldn't spend weeks discussing Austin and dancing at parties. Put so plainly, the accusation did seem absurd. Yet doubt, once planted, grew sturdy roots. Then why? She asked quietly. Why the attention, the conversations, the invitations? Men like you don't notice women like me without reason. Men like me. A muscle worked in his jaw. You've decided who I am based on what? My business? My bank account? After accusing me of calculated motives, examine your own assumptions. The rebuke stung because it contained truth. She had indeed categorized him just as Coalridge had categorized her, by external factors rather than character. Nathaniel reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small, worn piece of paper. He unfolded it carefully, revealing a child's drawing yellowed with age. The simple sketch showed a woman with dark hair and a prominent line down one side of her face, surrounded by crudely drawn butterflies. My mother, he said simply. Drawn by my 6-year-old hand. I carry it everywhere. His voice softened. When I first saw you in Miller's store, the resemblance struck me so forcefully I nearly spoke her name. Eliza stared at the drawing, her throat tight with unexpected emotion. My interest in you has nothing to do with property or business advantage, he continued. It began with a memory of someone loved, yes, but it continued because of who you are, your mind, your dignity, your quiet strength in the face of casual cruelty. Things far more valuable than land. He refolded the drawing with careful movements. My mother taught me to see beyond surfaces. My father showed me that love doesn't calculate profit margins. If you believe I'm incapable of those lessons, then perhaps Coalridge has scarred you more deeply than the fire ever did. The blunt assessment left Eliza speechless. Nathaniel placed the drawing on the desk between them. I'll leave this with you. Return it when you've decided whether I merit the same careful consideration you give to characters in your books. He moved toward the door, then paused. The dinner invitation remains open. I'll be at the hotel restaurant at 7, whether you join me or not. After he left, Eliza sat motionless, staring at the small folded paper. With trembling fingers, she opened it again, studying the child's rendering of a scarred woman surrounded by butterflies, loved not despite her difference, but with it, as an integral part of who she was. Outside the library window, she could see Cordelia Watson and several other women watching from across the street, clearly hoping to witness the aftermath of their scheme. For the first time, Eliza saw their cruelty not as a reflection of her worth, but of their own limitations. The realization straightened her spine as she carefully refolded Nathaniel's precious drawing and reached for her shawl. She had a dinner engagement to prepare for. The dinner at the hotel restaurant marked a turning point. Eliza arrived precisely at 7, wearing her own best dress rather than a borrowed one. A simple navy blue with a modest lace collar that had hung unworn in her wardrobe for years. She had arranged her hair herself, and though the result lacked Mrs. Holloway's practiced touch, there was dignity in its simplicity. Nathaniel rose when she entered, relief evident in his expression. Neither mentioned their earlier confrontation as he held her chair, but when she returned his mother's drawing across the table, their fingers touched briefly in silent reconciliation. Over the following week, they settled into a routine that scandalized Coalridge. Nathaniel would arrive at the library each afternoon, sometimes bringing architectural plans to discuss, other times simply books he thought might interest her. They took lunch together in the town square when weather permitted, and twice more dined at the hotel restaurant, their conversations ranging from literature to philosophy to their shared love of maps. For Eliza, these days held a surreal quality. She walked the same streets, performed the same duties, yet everything had transformed. She still heard whispers, but they no longer penetrated to her core. Nathaniel's presence acted as a shield, not because he physically protected her, but because his unwavering respect made others' opinions seem suddenly insignificant. The town's reaction evolved from shock to grudging acceptance, at least on the surface. Behind closed doors, the conspiracy among Coalridge's elite deepened. Mayor Watson called a town council meeting to address concerns about outside influence, while Cordelia's sewing circle became a war council planning Eliza's social downfall. Nature itself seemed to mirror the brewing conflict. Dark clouds gathered over the mountains for days, promising a summer deluge. When the storm finally broke, it came with sudden violence. Sheets of rain driven by howling wind that sent storefront signs clattering down Main Street. Eliza was returning from delivering books to elderly Mrs. Patterson, who was too frail to visit the library herself, when the downpour began. Within seconds, she was drenched, her shawl offering no protection against the torrent. She hurried along the boardwalk, fighting wind that threatened to snatch the empty book satchel from her grip. At the corner of Pine and Main, where the road dipped toward the creek, floodwater already churned ankle-deep. Eliza hitched her skirts and waded through, the cold water shocking against her skin. Lightning flashed, followed immediately by a deafening crack of thunder that made her stumble. The creek, normally a gentle stream bisecting the town, had transformed into a roaring monster, its banks overflowing. As Eliza approached the footbridge, horror seized her. Water surged over the wooden planks, and even as she watched, a section tore away, spinning downstream in the current. She hesitated, calculating. The main bridge was 3 blocks north, but likely equally dangerous. Returning to Mrs. Patterson's meant another mile in the opposite direction. The library and home lay just beyond the creek. Making her decision, Eliza turned north, fighting through the deepening water. The rain was so heavy she could barely see 3 feet ahead. Another flash of lightning illuminated a terrifying sight, a wall of water rushing down the creek bed, carrying debris from upstream. She scrambled for higher ground, but the water surged faster than she could move. It struck with physical force, knocking her sideways. Her hands grasped desperately for anything solid as the current dragged at her sodden skirts. Her fingers found a fence post, and she clung to it, the water rising rapidly around her waist. "Help!" she screamed, but her voice disappeared into the storm's fury. No one would be out in this deluge, and her precarious position was invisible from nearby buildings. The post shifted ominously in the softening ground. Eliza felt it tilting and knew she had moments before it gave way entirely. With desperate strength, she pulled herself along the fence line toward a large cottonwood tree whose roots might offer more stable anchor. She was 3 feet from the tree when the fence post tore free. The current caught her instantly, spinning her into deeper water. Panic closed her throat as she fought to keep her head above the churning surface. Something hard struck her shoulder, a floating branch, and instinctively she grabbed it, using it to push toward the tree. Her lungs burned, rain and floodwater filling her mouth each time she gasped for air. The tree seemed impossibly distant now as the current pulled her downstream. Her sodden clothing dragged like weights, her strength fading with each desperate stroke. Then, through the curtain of rain, a figure plunged into the water from the bank ahead. Strong arms caught her, arresting her downstream slide. Nathaniel's voice reached her, somehow cutting through the storm's roar. "I've got you. Hold on to me." He maneuvered them toward the bank, fighting the current that tried to drag them both away. Eliza clutched his shoulders, her limbs leaden with exhaustion and cold. Inch by excruciating inch, he pulled them toward safety, using a half-submerged fallen tree as leverage. When they finally collapsed on the muddy bank, both gasping for breath, Eliza became aware that they were behind the hotel, nearly a quarter-mile downstream from where she'd been swept away. Nathaniel helped her to her feet, supporting her weight as her legs threatened to buckle. "How did you find me?" she managed through chattering teeth. "I was heading to the library when the storm broke," he said, guiding her toward the hotel's back entrance. "Saw you on the far side of the creek. When that flash flood came through," his arm tightened around her waist. "I thought I'd lost you." The raw emotion in his voice penetrated even her shock-numbed senses. They stumbled into the hotel's kitchen, startling the cook and a dishwasher who immediately rushed to help, bringing towels and exclaiming over their drenched condition. "She needs dry clothes and warmth immediately," Nathaniel ordered, his usual composure replaced by urgent concern. "And send someone for the doctor." "I'm fine," Eliza protested weakly. "Just cold." "You nearly drowned," he countered, his voice unsteady. When their eyes met, the fear and relief she saw there told her everything the town's rumors had made her doubt. Without audience or calculation, with mud streaking his face and water dripping from his hair, Nathaniel Hayes looked at her as if she were the only fixed point in a collapsing world. The storm that nearly claimed Eliza's life became yet another chapter in Coalridge's gossip annals. By morning, the story had transformed. Nathaniel had carried her bodily from the flood. They had spent the night alone together in his hotel room. He had declared undying love as she lay at death's door. The truth was both simpler and more profound. After the hotel staff brought dry clothes, borrowed from the chambermaid, and the doctor confirmed Eliza had suffered no serious injury beyond bruises and mild exposure, Nathaniel had insisted on escorting her home. They had walked slowly through the storm's aftermath, the rain now reduced to a gentle patter, neither speaking much but intensely aware of how narrowly disaster had been averted. At her door, he had taken her hand, his usual eloquence abandoned for simple truth. "I've faced blizzards, business rivals, and once a grizzly bear, but nothing frightened me like watching you in that flood." The admission, spoken in the shadowed privacy of her porch, had left Eliza speechless. She had simply squeezed his hand in response, the gesture conveying what words could not. Now, 3 days later, the library had reopened after repairs to a leaking roof. Eliza moved among the shelves, checking for water damage to the books, her mind divided between her tasks and the memory of Nathaniel's face in that unguarded moment. The door opened, bringing not Nathaniel, who had been called to Denver again for 2 days, but Cordelia Watson, wearing an expression of artificial concern. "Miss Morgan," she greeted with honeyed insincerity. "How good to see you recovered from your adventure. The entire town has been simply beside itself with worry." "Thank you for your concern, Mrs. Watson," Eliza replied neutrally, continuing her inspection of the shelves. Cordelia fingered the spines of several books, her gloves leaving faint marks on the leather bindings. "Such a fortunate coincidence that Mr. Hayes happened to be nearby just when you needed rescuing. Almost as if Providence itself approves of your friendship." The pause before friendship carried unmistakable insinuation. "Mr. Hayes explained he was on his way to the library," Eliza said, refusing to rise to the bait. "Yes, he does spend a remarkable amount of time here." Cordelia's voice took on a concerned tone that fooled neither of them. "Which makes the town council's recent discussions all the more painful for me to share with you." Eliza paused, giving Cordelia her full attention. "What discussions?" Cordelia sighed dramatically. "About the library's future. I so hoped Mr. Hayes would have been forthcoming with you, given your closeness. But men can be so focused on business they overlook the personal complications. Mrs. Watson, please speak plainly. The railway plans, dear. The final draft Mr. Hayes presented to the council yesterday includes the depot being built precisely where this library stands. She watched Eliza's expression carefully. Surely he mentioned this? No? How unlike him to keep you in the dark. Eliza's mind raced. The plans she had seen placed the depot near the northern creek bend, a quarter-mile from the library. There must be some mistake, she said slowly. The plans I reviewed. Oh, preliminary sketches only, Cordelia waved dismissively. The engineering assessment found this location optimal. Something about grade and water access. She extracted a folded document from her reticule. I brought a copy of the proposal. I thought you deserved to know, given your attachment to this building. Eliza accepted the document with steady hands that belied her inner turmoil. The official-looking plans, complete with the Hayes Railway Company letterhead, clearly showed the proposed depot occupying the library's current location. As you can see, Cordelia continued, watching her closely, the council was quite surprised. Several members questioned Mr. Hayes directly about your property being targeted when other suitable locations exist. His response was most businesslike. Something about strategic necessity trumping sentimentality. Each word struck with precision, targeting Eliza's newly healed confidence. She stared at the plans, trying to reconcile them with Nathaniel's earnest discussions about preserving Coalridge's cultural landmarks. Of course, Cordelia added with exaggerated sympathy. He's included provisions for a small reading room within the depot, as he promised you. Though naturally it would be under railway management, not independent like your father's legacy. Progress demands sacrifices, I suppose. Eliza carefully refolded the document. Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Mrs. Watson. I felt it my duty, Cordelia replied, adjusting her gloves. Woman to woman. Men like Hayes operate in a world where business and pleasure often intermingle. I would hate to see you mistake one for the other. After Cordelia departed, satisfaction radiating from her like perfume, Eliza sank into her chair behind the circulation desk. The plans lay before her, their implications impossible to ignore. If authentic, they revealed a betrayal beyond her worst fears, not just of her trust, but of her father's legacy. Yet something felt wrong. The Nathaniel who had waded into floodwaters without hesitation, who carried his mother's drawing close to his heart, who discussed Jane Austen with genuine insight, could he be the same man who would secretly plan to demolish her library while courting her favor? Doubt crept back, its tendrils finding purchase in old insecurities. Perhaps she had been naive, allowing herself to believe a man like Hayes could see beyond her scars to the woman beneath. Perhaps Coalridge had been right all along. She was simply ugly Eliza, momentarily useful to a businessman's ambitions. The door opened again, this time admitting Mrs. Holloway, who took one look at Eliza's face and the document on the desk before declaring, "Whatever that woman told you, question it. Her tongue drips poison sweetened with false concern." "She brought plans," Eliza said quietly, pushing the document toward her friend. "The depot will replace the library." Mrs. Holloway examined the papers with narrowed eyes. "And you believe this? After everything?" "I don't know what to believe anymore," Eliza admitted, the admission painful in its honesty. "I want to trust him, but a lifetime of judgment has taught you to expect the worst." Mrs. Holloway finished gently. "Consider this, my dear. If Hayes truly planned to destroy your library, why court you so publicly? Why not simply make an offer through agents? Why risk the town's ridicule by associating with its most unfairly maligned citizen?" The questions hung in the air, rational counterpoints to emotional wounds. Eliza had no answers, only the creeping suspicion that Coalridge's web of cruelty had expanded to trap not just her, but Nathaniel as well. Nathaniel returned from Denver the following afternoon, his arrival heralded by the usual stir of activity at the hotel. Eliza watched from the library window as his carriage passed, her emotions a turbulent mix of longing and suspicion. The plans Cordelia had delivered remained locked in her desk drawer, a poisonous secret she had shared with no one beyond Mrs. Holloway. For hours, she debated whether to confront him or wait for him to reveal his true intentions. Every possible approach seemed fraught with potential humiliation. If the plans were genuine, questioning them meant admitting she had been fooled. If they were falsified, accusing him meant revealing how easily her trust could be shaken. The decision was made for her when Nathaniel appeared at the library just before closing, carrying a small package and wearing a smile that faltered when he saw her guarded expression. "Eliza? What's wrong?" She straightened books that needed no straightening. "Nothing. Welcome back. Clearly something is troubling you." He set down his package, studying her with the direct gaze that had once felt like recognition but now seemed calculating. "Has something happened?" "Mrs. Watson paid me a visit," she said finally, watching his face carefully. "She brought some interesting documents." A flicker of something, concern, guilt, crossed his features. "What sort of documents?" Rather than answering, Eliza unlocked the drawer and withdrew the folded plans, placing them silently on the desk between them. Nathaniel opened them, his brow furrowing as he examined the contents. "Where did she get these?" he asked, his voice unnaturally controlled. "From the town council meeting where you presented them," Eliza replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. "The meeting where you explained that strategic necessity trumps sentimentality." Nathaniel looked up sharply. "I never said that. I never presented these plans." "The letterhead is your company's," she pointed out. "The signature appears to be yours." "It's a forgery," he said flatly. "A clumsy one at that." He turned the plans toward her, pointing to details. "This isn't our standard format. The engineering notations are nonsensical. And I would never authorize building over existing structures when vacant land is available." He reached inside his coat, withdrawing a leather folio. "These are the actual plans I presented yesterday." He unfolded a larger, more detailed drawing showing the depot situated exactly where he had originally indicated, near the creek bend, well away from the library. Eliza compared the two documents, noting the differences he highlighted. The forgery, though convincing at first glance, contained subtle errors that became obvious when examined against the authentic plans. "Why would Mrs. Watson do this?" she asked, though the answer seemed increasingly clear. "Because our friendship threatens the established order," Nathaniel replied grimly. "Because the northern route bypasses properties owned by Watson and his allies. Because they assume they can manipulate you through me, or me through you. And they very nearly succeeded," Eliza admitted quietly. Nathaniel's expression softened. "You had reason to doubt. A lifetime of Coalridge's cruelty doesn't vanish in a few weeks." "I wanted to believe you," she said, meeting his eyes. "But a part of me kept whispering that it made more sense for you to be using me than—" She trailed off, unable to articulate the alternative. "Then caring for you?" He completed the thought gently. "Is that so impossible to believe?" The direct question hung between them, demanding honesty. Eliza swallowed hard. "Yes," she whispered. 23 years of being ugly Eliza makes it very difficult to believe." Pain flashed across his face. "Don't call yourself that. Not ever. It's what they call me. What they've always called me. They're wrong." His voice carried such conviction that Eliza found herself wanting desperately to believe him. "They've been wrong about you since the day they decided your scars defined your worth." He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes. "Eliza Morgan, you are the most beautiful woman I've ever known." The words, spoken with such quiet certainty, struck her speechless. No one, not even her father in his most comforting moments, had ever called her beautiful. "You don't need to say that," she managed finally. I'm not saying it out of kindness or pity, he replied. I'm saying it because it's true, because beauty exists in dignity maintained through cruelty, in intelligence that seeks understanding rather than advantage, in eyes that still manage to see good in a world that's shown precious little of it. He reached for her hand, but Eliza stepped back, the movement instinctive. I need time, she said, her voice unsteady. Too much has happened too quickly. I can't sort truth from manipulation anymore. Something like resignation settled in Nathaniel's expression. I understand. He carefully refolded his plans, leaving them on the desk alongside the forgery. Keep both. Compare them. Investigate them. Ask the engineer at the surveyor's office to verify which is authentic. He turned toward the door, then paused. The package is yours regardless. It's the book I mentioned in Denver, Local Flora of the Rocky Mountains. I thought it might interest you. After he left, Eliza sank into her chair, staring at the two sets of plans side by side. The rational part of her mind could see the forgery for what it was. A desperate attempt by Coalridge's elite to maintain their control, to prevent change that threatened their positions. Yet the damage had been done. Seeds of doubt, once planted, proved difficult to uproot. She unwrapped the package slowly. Inside was the promised book, its illustrations of mountain wildflowers exquisitely detailed. A pressed columbine flower marked a page, and beside it, Nathaniel had written, like the flowers that bloom after forest fires, beauty often emerges from what appears to be destruction. And tears blurred Eliza's vision as she traced the words with her fingertip. So many emotions warred within her. Hope and fear, trust and doubt. A lifetime of pain against a few weeks of unexpected joy. She closed the book carefully, unable yet to decide which would prevail. The following morning, Eliza woke to urgent knocking at her cottage door. Mrs. Holloway stood on the porch, her normally tidy appearance disheveled, her breath coming in short gasps from the walk. You need to come with me, the older woman said without preamble. There's something you must see. What's happened? Eliza asked, alarmed by her friend's agitation. No time to explain. Get dressed. 10 minutes later, they were hurrying toward the hotel, Mrs. Holloway refusing to elaborate despite Eliza's questions. They entered through the kitchen, where the cook nodded knowingly and directed them up the back stairs. Mrs. Holloway, I don't understand, Eliza began. Hush now. You will. The elderly woman led her to a door at the end of the second-floor hallway and knocked in a distinctive pattern. The door opened to reveal Nathaniel, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his expression transforming from cautious to surprised when he saw Eliza. Agnes, you didn't explain. No time for niceties, Mrs. Holloway interrupted, ushering Eliza inside. Show her what you found. Eliza hesitated at the threshold of Nathaniel's private room, propriety warring with curiosity. The space beyond was clearly a working area rather than sleeping quarters. A sitting room converted to an office, with maps and documents spread across every surface. Please, Nathaniel said simply, stepping aside. The center of the room was dominated by a large table where several items were arranged with careful precision. The forged plans Cordelia had delivered, a stack of town council minutes, and what appeared to be financial ledgers. What is all this? Eliza asked. Evidence, Mrs. Holloway announced triumphantly. Tell her, Mr. Hayes. Nathaniel gestured to the documents. After yesterday, I couldn't let the forgery stand unchallenged. I began investigating who might have created it and why. The mayor and his cronies, obviously. Mrs. Holloway interjected. That was my initial suspicion, Nathaniel agreed. But I needed proof. I spoke with my surveyor, who confirmed he'd never produced such plans. Then I examined the paper itself. He indicated the forged document. This is Watson Company stationery with my letterhead overlaid. A crude method, but effective for someone without technical knowledge. Eliza studied the forgery more carefully, noting what he pointed out. How did you discover this? I didn't, Nathaniel admitted. Mrs. Holloway did. The elderly woman straightened proudly. I was at the general store this morning when Mayor Watson's clerk was purchasing stationery. I recognized the watermark from your forgery. One thing led to another. Mrs. Holloway took it upon herself to conduct further investigation, Nathaniel continued, a hint of admiration in his voice. She visited the mayor's office under the pretense of discussing the church social. While his clerk was occupied, I happened to notice some interesting papers on his desk, Mrs. Holloway said with exaggerated innocence. Including this. She tapped a leather-bound journal. The mayor's planning diary. Note the entry from 3 days ago. Eliza leaned closer to read the neat handwriting. Revised Hayes plans prepared for Morgan delivery. See to handle personally. Cold realization washed over her. They deliberately set out to deceive me. Not just you, Nathaniel said grimly. Look at these council minutes from last month. The document detailed discussions about property values along both proposed railway routes. Properties along the southern route, owned primarily by Watson and his allies, would increase dramatically in value if the depot were built nearby. The northern route, which Nathaniel preferred for practical reasons, would benefit different landowners, many of whom were not part of Watson's inner circle. They're manipulating the town's future for personal profit, Eliza said slowly, while using your reputation and our friendship as convenient distractions. Nathaniel added carefully, if they could convince you I was untrustworthy and turn public opinion against the northern route. 2 birds, 1 stone, Mrs. Holloway finished bluntly. They keep their profitable southern route and put ugly Eliza back in her place. Eliza flinched at the nickname. Nathaniel noticed and moved instinctively closer, though he didn't touch her. There's more, he said quietly. The library relocation wasn't my idea, it was theirs. He indicated another council document from weeks earlier. They've been planning to sell the library property to a Denver hotel developer. My arrival simply provided a convenient scapegoat. The betrayal cut deeper than Eliza had expected. The library wasn't just her workplace. It was her father's legacy, her sanctuary when the world turned cruel, the one place in Coalridge that had always been safe. What will you do with this information? She asked. Expose it, Nathaniel replied without hesitation. At tomorrow's town hall meeting, Watson has scheduled it to announce the final railway route, expecting me to concede to the southern path under pressure. They'll deny everything, Mrs. Holloway warned. Not with this evidence. Nathaniel's expression hardened. And not when I offer to withdraw completely if they persist in their scheme. Coalridge needs this railway more than I need the business. Eliza's mind raced through implications. If you expose them publicly, there will be consequences. For all of us. I'm prepared for that, he said steadily. The question is, are you? The question hung between them, weighted with significance beyond the immediate situation. Eliza realized he was asking not just about the town's reaction, but about her willingness to stand with him, to trust him despite doubt, to believe in possibilities beyond the narrow life she'd accepted. Before she could answer, a sharp knock at the door interrupted. Nathaniel opened it to find his assistant, breathing hard from running. Sir, there's trouble. Mayor Watson's calling an emergency council meeting. He's telling everyone you're planning to abandon the railway project and leave town by nightfall. Nathaniel's expression darkened. They're moving faster than expected. The council's gathering at the town hall now, the assistant continued. Watson's brought in men from the mining camp to maintain order, but they look more like hired muscle. Mrs. Holloway clutched Eliza's arm. They're forcing a confrontation before you can present your evidence. Nathaniel turned to Eliza, his decision already visible in his eyes. I have to go now. You can't face them alone, she said, surprising herself with the fierce protectiveness in her voice. They've prepared this ambush carefully. I don't intend to be ambushed, Nathaniel replied, gathering key documents into a leather portfolio. But I won't hide from bullies either. He paused, his gaze holding hers. You once asked why I noticed you when others looked away. This is why, Eliza. Courage isn't loud or showy. It's facing each day with dignity when retreat would be easier. Without thinking, Eliza reached for his hand. Then we'll face them together. The town hall, normally reserved for monthly meetings and holiday gatherings, buzzed with tension as Eliza, Nathaniel, and Mrs. Holloway approached. News of the emergency session had spread rapidly, drawing a crowd that spilled onto the steps and surrounding street. Miners in dirt-streaked clothes stood shoulder to shoulder with shopkeepers and ranchers' wives, all sensing the unusual drama unfolding in their ordinarily predictable community. Eliza felt the crowd's attention shift as they drew near. First curious glances, then outright stares as word passed that ugly Eliza was walking openly beside Nathaniel Hayes, her scarred face unhidden, her hand resting in the crook of his arm. Are you certain about this? Nathaniel asked quietly as they paused at the bottom of the town hall steps. Once we enter, there's no retreating without confirmation of every rumor they've spread. I've spent 23 years retreating, Eliza replied, a new steadiness in her voice. Today we advance. Inside, the hall had been arranged like a courtroom. Mayor Watson and the town council sat on the raised platform normally reserved for holiday pageants, while an audience of Coalridge's most prominent citizens filled the rows of chairs. A space at the front, conspicuously empty, seemed designed to isolate Nathaniel when he arrived. Their entrance caused an immediate hush, followed by a wave of whispers. Cordelia Watson's face tightened with displeasure at the sight of Eliza beside Nathaniel, while the mayor struggled to maintain his practiced expression of civic concern. Mr. Hayes, he called with false joviality. How good of you to join us. We were just discussing the unfortunate rumors about your imminent departure. Were you? Nathaniel replied pleasantly, guiding Eliza to a seat in the front row while he remained standing. I'm curious to hear these rumors, considering I first learned of them from my own staff less than an hour ago. A nervous titter ran through the crowd. The mayor's smile hardened. Now, there's no need for theatrics. We're simply seeking clarification about your railway plans, given the conflicting information circulating. Conflicting information is a diplomatic way to describe forgery, Nathaniel said, his voice carrying easily in the suddenly silent hall. He opened his portfolio, extracting the false plans. Like this document, created on Watson Company stationery, with my letterhead fraudulently applied. Gasps and murmurs erupted as he held up the evidence. Mayor Watson's face flushed dark red, while beside him, Councilman Palmer shifted uncomfortably. That's a serious accusation, the mayor blustered. One you cannot possibly substantiate. Can't I? Nathaniel countered. He methodically presented the evidence they had gathered, the distinctive watermark, the diary entries, the earlier council minutes documenting the conspiracy. Each new revelation sent fresh waves of shock through the audience. Judge Harrison, seated among the council members, leaned forward with deepening concern. Watson, is this true? Did you fabricate documents to manipulate public opinion? Absolutely not, the mayor protested, though his confidence was visibly crumbling. Hayes is attempting to distract from his own deceptions. Everyone knows he's been using his association with Miss Morgan to secure the northern properties at favorable rates. A convenient theory, Nathaniel acknowledged, except for one crucial fact. I have never once discussed business with Miss Morgan. I have never made an offer for her property, nor inquired about its availability. He turned to face the crowd directly. My interest in Eliza Morgan has nothing to do with railways or property values. It has everything to do with the woman herself. The simple declaration, spoken with quiet dignity in a room filled with those who had mocked Eliza for decades, created a profound silence. Cordelia Watson broke it with a derisive laugh. Really, Mr. Hayes, there's no need to maintain this charade. We're all adults here. Whatever arrangement you made with Miss Morgan to secure her cooperation. Enough. Nathaniel's voice cut through the hall like a whip. For weeks, I've tolerated the whispers, the speculation, the crude insinuations. I've respected Miss Morgan's wishes to avoid confrontation. But I will not stand silently while you transform something genuine into something tawdry to serve your greed. He turned to Eliza, his expression softening as their eyes met. Then, to the astonishment of everyone present, he knelt before her seat, taking her hand in both of his. I came to Coalridge for business, he said, his voice gentle but carrying in the hushed room. I intended to build a railway, negotiate contracts, and depart as I've done in a dozen towns before. I never expected to find someone who would make me question whether any success was worthwhile if it meant leaving. Eliza's heart pounded so loudly she was certain everyone could hear it. Nathaniel, she whispered. Not here. Not like this. Precisely here, he countered softly, where everyone can witness what they've tried to deny, that you are worthy of love, admiration, and respect. That your scars are simply part of a remarkable woman, not the entirety of who you are. From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet box. The collective intake of breath from the audience was audible as he opened it, revealing a simple ring with a single perfect diamond. Eliza Morgan, he said, his voice steady despite the extraordinary circumstances. I love you, not despite your past, but with it. Not in secret, but openly. Will you marry me? Time seemed suspended in the shocked silence that followed. Eliza stared at the ring, at Nathaniel's earnest face, at the unprecedented future suddenly unfolding before her. 23 years of mockery and isolation had not prepared her for this moment of public redemption. Her gaze shifted beyond Nathaniel to the stunned faces of Coalridge's citizens. People who had defined her by her scars, who had called her ugly Eliza, without thought for the woman behind the name. Their judgment had shaped her life, confined her possibilities, convinced her that certain happinesses were forever beyond her reach. Until now. Yes, she said, her voice gathering strength with each word. Yes, I will marry you. As Nathaniel slipped the ring onto her finger, the town hall erupted. Some with applause, others with continued shock. Mayor Watson, with speechless fury at his carefully orchestrated confrontation, transformed into something entirely unexpected. When Nathaniel rose and helped Eliza to her feet, their joined hands raised in quiet triumph, he whispered words meant only for her. Let them call you what they want. I call you my queen. The wedding took place 6 weeks later on a clear autumn day when the cottonwood trees along the creek had turned to gold. Not in the town church where Eliza had never felt welcome, but in the library her father had built. The space transformed with wildflowers and lanterns hanging from the rafters. Judge Harrison performed the ceremony, his age-lined face solemn as he spoke of unions based on character rather than convenience. Mrs. Holloway stood as Eliza's witness, prouder than any mother as she watched her friend step beyond the boundaries that had confined her for so long. The guest list was short but meaningful. Stanley Miller and his wife, the children from Story Hour and their hesitantly approving parents, a handful of townspeople who had shown small kindnesses over the years. Conspicuously absent were Mayor Watson and his allies, still smarting from their public exposure and the subsequent election that had removed the mayor from office in favor of Judge Harrison. Eliza wore no veil to hide her face. Her dress, sewn by Mrs. Holloway and 2 other elderly women who had unexpectedly offered their assistance, was the color of spring leaves, a deliberate departure from traditional white, symbolizing growth rather than conventional expectations. You look beautiful, Nathaniel whispered as they exchanged simple gold bands, his eyes holding the same steady appreciation they had shown since the day they met. For the first time, Eliza believed him without doubt or reservation. The reception spilled onto the library lawn, where tables had been arranged beneath strings of paper lanterns. As twilight settled over Coalridge, Eliza found herself momentarily alone, watching her new husband in animated conversation with Judge Harrison about plans for the town's growth. "Quite the transformation," came a voice behind her. Eliza turned to find Cordelia Watson, uninvited but impeccably dressed, a tight smile fixed on her face. From town spinster to railway baroness in less than 2 months. One might almost admire such ambition. The familiar attempt to wound struck Eliza differently now, like hearing an echo from a past increasingly distant. "Mrs. Watson," she acknowledged calmly, "I'm surprised to see you here. I wanted to offer congratulations personally," Cordelia replied with artificial sweetness, "and to let you know that although Frederick has resigned as mayor, our influence in Coalridge remains considerable. The railway may have chosen its path, but the future holds many opportunities for adjustments." The veiled threat hung in the air between them. Once it would have intimidated Eliza into retreat. Now she merely smiled. "You know, Cordelia," she said conversationally, using the woman's first name for the first time in their adult lives, "for 23 years, I believe the worst thing that could happen was being called ugly. I was wrong. The worst thing was allowing that judgment to become my prison." She glanced toward Nathaniel, then back to Cordelia's carefully composed face. "You might consider whether you're building similar prisons with your need for control and status." Cordelia's smile faltered. "How dare you presume to lecture me?" "I'm not lecturing," Eliza interrupted gently. "I'm offering understanding. We were children together once, before the fire, before your mother taught you that worth comes from appearance and influence. I remember a girl who shared her slate pencils when mine broke, who didn't flinch at difference until she was taught to." Something flickered in Cordelia's eyes, a momentary glimpse of recognition, quickly suppressed. Without another word, she turned and departed, her husband trailing behind like a shadow of her formidable presence. Nathaniel appeared at Eliza's side, concern evident in his expression. "Everything all right?" "Yes," she said, surprising herself with the truth of it. "I think perhaps it is." The depot construction began the following week, the cornerstone laid in a ceremony that drew visitors from surrounding towns. True to his original plans, Nathaniel incorporated an expanded library wing, twice the size of the original building, with special sections for children's literature and local history. The cornerstone bore a simple engraving, "Hayes Public Library, where all stories matter." By spring, when the first train arrived in Coalridge bringing new commerce and possibilities, Eliza had settled into a life so different from her previous existence, it sometimes felt like a story from her beloved books. She maintained her role as librarian, but now with an assistant who managed daily operations while she developed educational programs that drew acclaim from as far as Denver. The whispers never entirely ceased. Such was the nature of small towns, but their character transformed. Where once ugly Eliza had been muttered with cruel derision, now mothers told their daughters about the librarian whose worth had been recognized when she refused to accept others' limitations. On a warm afternoon 5 years later, Eliza sat on the library steps watching a group of children playing in the square. Among them was a dark-haired girl of 3, her father's blue eyes bright with intelligence as she constructed elaborate stories for her playmates. "Miss Eliza," called Emma Thatcher, now a young woman preparing to leave for Teachers College in Denver. "Will you tell us a story before I go? Like when we were small." Eliza smiled, gathering the children around her as she had done countless times before. They settled eagerly, their young faces upturned with anticipation, none of them noticing or caring about the scars that had once defined her in the town's eyes. "Once," she began, "in a town not so different from this one, there lived a woman who believed what others said about her." As the story unfolded, her story, transformed into a fable of courage and unexpected love, Eliza caught Nathaniel's eye as he paused on his way from the depot. He smiled, the same smile that had first seen beyond her scars to the woman beneath, and she realized that the greatest gift wasn't being called beautiful after a lifetime of ugly. It was being truly seen, scarred and imperfect, yet loved not despite these things but with them, inseparable parts of a whole person deemed worthy of a happy ending.